But one thing, I was just listening to an old talk of Alan Watts the other day, in which he mentioned a book. It might have been Tragedy and Hope. And this was years ago. This was about an 18-year-old talk. And he said, I'm careful about how I talk about a book, because I've noticed when I talk about a book, the price mysteriously skyrockets, and even availability of something that wasn't that hard to get a hold of all of a sudden mysteriously becomes difficult to get a hold of. And I think that's true. I mean, I know that maybe you have not considered this, but even though your channels aren't huge with huge subscribers, what you're doing will be noticed, not just algorithmically. It will be noticed by people who pay attention. And if you mention a book, it may well be that it's going to go up in price. You see what I mean?
No, absolutely.
Censorship is very real, and there are, it's short of, kicking your door in Fahrenheit 451 style. They can just drive the price of the books up and make them hard to get a hold of.
And they're even doing that now on Archive, the online archive. I think it's
Yes.
archive.org, and they say
Yeah.
you have to rent the book as though it's a library,
Yes.
but there's
Yeah.
only limited numbers of these digital books, and you have to renew them every hour pending
Yes.
availability.
Yes, I mean, when I first started using Internet Archive, that was not the way. You could find pretty much anything that you wanted. Now, when they say rent, I mean, I have never actually paid for a book, but I did sign up with an email address and a password, and I borrow the book. And, I have to hit it if I need it for more than an hour. I have to, keep borrowing it again every hour on the hour. So that's, and the other thing too, I was looking at a more scholarly work, an article, and I ended up having to sign up for something. I mean, it was a freebie, but I don't like giving my information out, just to any, but it's one technique of censorship is put it behind a paywall. Another technique is you've got to log in, give a little bit of your personal information if you want to borrow that. But you'll find so much good material is only available on things like, Oxford or Scribd or Cambridge, or, things that you have to sign into
Mhm.
if you want to see it. So it's good that you're doing this. It's,
I do worry sometimes that, I'm letting the cat out of the bag by putting all these books in one place and talking about them and, maybe driving the price up. But but like we mentioned at the start, I think before we came on, the person who helped you moved said when he helps people move, people rarely have collections of books these days. So there are really not that many people doing it, like collecting books and building up libraries in the same way. And the way I look at it is, well, there's not much point in me having these books and just sitting on them. I've got to try and get them out and help other people to benefit from the contents. And the other thing is it keeps me accountable, because if I know I've got live streams, instead of doing something else that evening, I sit down and I get a few chapters read, and it keeps me in the book and making sure I'm getting the readings done too. So I kind of look upon it like I'm sort of helping people, and I hope I'm not doing too much damage with driving prices up.
I think at this point, I mean, that is Alan always reminded us that we had a set limited time with the internet, and that has turned out to be true. He said about 20 years. And if you think of all of the censorship and the care that you have to exhibit, and just, I saw a clip that was going around. I don't know where Donald Trump said this or when he said it, but he was saying, yes, of course, we have to have censorship. I'm not sure he used that word, but we have to control the internet in some way. And so that window that Alan always predicted we would have, that is closing very rapidly. And so at this point, I'm less concerned about driving a price up. I don't need a copy of the book if you're talking about it. That's good enough for me. But one thing that I'll just share on this vein, this morning I started listening to a talk of Alan's that he did near the beginning of 2020, Operation 2020. And it was from February the 2nd, 2020, entitled A Perfect Storm, Chinese Traveling at New Year, Party and Song, Happy Reunions, then Fear, as it all went wrong. And so as I was listening, he said something that I thought, oh, this is definitely a keeper. I'll see if I can just pull it right up here again. He said, he got right in there, and remember, this is the early 2020, but he got right in there sharing an article in the mainstream media about the challenges of deep fakes. So immediately they were planting the idea that you can't trust what you're seeing, that misinformation, the internet is rife with misinformation. And he was reading the article, I can post it with this talk. It was from an innovation summit that was being held, and the woman said, this is the challenge of deep fakes. Over the past decade, social media has provided a rich source of news for media companies, yet the phenomenon of fake news, and in particular the emergence of deep fakes, has meant that organizations have had to tweak their approach. And Alan said, it isn't just about photographs and things like that and voices, which they can fake. Of course they can, but it's really about managing things in real time. You'd be surprised how many of these organizations are attached to this particular organization at the moment. The organization was called the UGC, a news gathering branch of Reuters. So he said it's a global system on the go watching social media. And Alan continued, and sure, there's going to be a lot of iffy things. But I really believe that no matter how crazy some of the stuff out there is, it shouldn't be censored. Really don't believe anything should be censored at all. I really don't. Give the people some credit for thinking for themselves and deciding for themselves. You've got to, if you want to have a free society. He paused. We don't have a free society. What am I kidding? I'm not kidding about that at all. We don't have a free society at all. Of course we don't. So that there we are. Our window is closing, and I've had a sense of urgency, obviously for years, but especially since Alan's passing, and looking around and seeing how quickly things are moving, that any of us who have the voice and the and by that I just mean the willingness to use our voice and what we know and where we are, because I'm sure that you've had this thought cross your mind before in some form or another. Do I really know enough to be sitting behind a mic and talk, that
100% every single time,
yeah.
even before this call, I was like, do I know enough about, but that's why I thought bringing the books in the way I do, it's not about me so much. It's more about like, okay, what did this author do? What did this researcher say? And then I'm just adding my thoughts and connections as they come along. But I certainly have that self-talk very often. But again, that's why I try and make it, okay, let's do it about the books. And if we focus on there, and I make quite long form videos, which I think most people will not bother to engage with. And so only the people who have the attention span and the willingness and the intention to find information will stick with it and get the benefit. And so I think that acts as a sort of filter, which helps me sort of fly under the radar. I'm never going to be hitting hundreds of thousands of views and millions of subs and followers and all that. But I think through word of mouth and people being drawn to Alan's long form talks, for example, or the work of, let's say, Richard Grove, who I've been sort of studying under as well the last few years and mentoring under. This long form content is self-selecting in a way, and it helps keep the censorship trolls at bay to a certain degree, I think.